السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد قائد الغر المحجلين، وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا بفيض فضلك رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Imam Ibrahim al-Halabi's Multaqa al-Abhur, we have reached a sensitive chapter today, and that is the chapter on the rulings of Sarf. These are sometimes translated as being monetary exchange, but as we'll see, there's ikhtilaf on how the rulings of Sarf apply to contemporary rulings of modern currencies. So we will touch upon that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. I just wanted to confirm that those of you who are online, you're able to follow clearly, inshallah.
Yes.
تماما. توكلنا على الله. Alhamdulillah. So this section on Sarf is important because it relates on one side to riba. Right? Sarf is the exchange of gold for gold or gold for silver. That's what's textually established. And we'll look at the definition. Now, when you exchange one jins of an item for another, what are you not allowed to have? They can exchange any commodity of the same category. What is not permissible?
Ziyada.
Yeah, right. So if you exchange wheat, for example, what you're not allowed to have? Firstly, ziyada or tafadul, right? What else are you not allowed to have? You're not allowed to have deferral. Jazakumullah khair, right? So you're also not allowed to have deferral. So this is the first governing consideration in general. Right? And we looked at that when we looked at the rulings of riba. Right? إذا اتحد الجنس, if the same category, then two prohibitions exist. Tafadul and nasa, right? Deferral. Now, gold is a category, silver is a category. And they're both considered athman. So, in order to prevent riba, these rulings apply here. So, sarf is related, the rulings of sarf are related to the rulings of riba and their prevention. But there are specific texts that have come with respect to sarf that we will touch upon as well first, and then try to understand the contemporary applications second, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these touch upon also some principles that we see regarding Islamic law, right? It's important to always remind ourselves of what we're seeking to understand here, along with the text, that we try to understand legal method in the Hanafi school, also appreciate as we go along what are the relied upon positions, both within the madhab, number one, but also as they relate to contemporary issues, right? And to share with you some resources to help apply these issues. So today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we'll look at this idea of that which is original currency, a thaman, khilqatan, and then the consideration of modern currencies as being thaman istilahan, and the nature of gold and silver, to appreciate the wisdom of Sarf rulings, and do the rulings of Sarf apply to modern currency, both the prevalent opinion and the opinion of many, or a majority of the leading contemporary Hanafi fuqaha, بإذن ta'ala. Tamaman. And then we'll look at the key applied rulings. And there are some key concepts here to appreciate what is Sarf, the conditions of Sarf, particularly the exchange within the majlis, at-taqabud fil majlis. This is a very important condition. And the notion of innate value, thamaniya, that is contained in gold and silver. And so the Shara has deemed gold and silver to have innate value, meaning that in whatever form you have gold and silver, the rulings of Sarf, the rulings of riba, and the rulings of Sarf, if they're being exchanged, apply. Whether it's a gold coin, it's a chunk of gold, it's high value gold, it's worn out gold, it's in jewelry. If there's exchange, then these rulings apply. Okay, so that's one key consideration. Another important consideration, of course, is practically, because people deal with gold and silver. So if you want to avoid problems of arising in matters like exchange of jewelry, what would you do? So if you want to exchange old jewelry for new jewelry, right? You break it into two contracts, and there's hadiths that have come regarding this. There are hadiths that have come regarding this. And see, Abdul Latif, remind me, we'll put the onus on you, but I'll share where it is. We'll share some hadiths related to this with the commentary from Sheikh Nuruddin Itr's Sharh on Bulugh al-Maram. Tamaman. So this is, a little of some of the key concepts that we're looking at. Also, we'll be touching upon rules related to fulus. And fulus were originally there to complete transactions. A bit like, you have coins like pennies, cents, in pounds or dollars. Right? Do you ever go buy significant things by the penny? Like if you went to buy a house, would you say, could you tell me the price of this house in pennies? No, right? And if someone came to try to buy your car for pennies, would you accept to do so? See, Abdul Latif? You got a car you really want to sell.
No.
Okay. Why? Because it's not normally done, right? It's not normally done. So the same thing would used to apply to fulus. But then, due to various reasons, fulus became more common. So rules applied. But fulus also, they were made, the value was conventional value. But then funny things would happen with fulus that people stopped dealing with them, or they went out of control. So what would happen historically? Sometimes the traders would stop dealing with them. Sometimes the authorities would ban the trade in the fulus. Right? Gold has an intrinsic value. You could take one type of gold coin and remint it as another, because there's a weight value to gold. But the conventional currency, so this is where this issue will come up that we will touch upon, that are the rules related to fulus, and when they cease to be used. And keep in mind that the fulus could cease to be used either in the market or with the Bayt al-Mal. And from that, there's a final issue that comes up, which is the issue of debt swapping, qalb al-dayn, and we'll touch upon that briefly. So let's look at the rulings related to sarf. Now, before we'll look at some hadiths, but one of the important points of method, Sadati, is that when you seek to understand a concept, where do you get the lughawi meaning from? So if you open the commentary, what do they tell you is the meaning of sarf? Sidi Abdul Latif?
بيع تماما بتماما.
No, so the lughawi meaning, not the shari'i meaning.
Oh, sorry. نقل والزيادة.
Yeah. So Majma al-Anhur tells you it's a naql, to transfer something, right? And increase. But what does that mean? It's very important, Sadati, to make it a habit to look up and dig for the meanings, right? Right? So, and some just said it's a ziyada. Sarf, which is money exchange, but how is it ziyada? Right? One should always, as a student of knowledge, ask this question. Because if you're exchanging gold for gold, is there ziyada? If done in a permissible way? No, there isn't.
No, the increase would be riba.
Exactly. So Ibn Abdin, for example, explains, based on what's mentioned in the Misbah al-Munir, that the ziyada is ahadu ma'nayayhi, right? But ziyada here, it refers to the action when say, sarfu dhahabi bidirham is because there's bay'ah, because you're exchanging, right? There's a contractual exchange. Now, if you're exchanging something, it's because you're seeking a gain, correct? If it was disadvantageous for you to exchange, would you exchange your gold for silver or vice versa? No. And sarf has other meanings, right? Sarf has other meanings. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, لا يقبل الله منه صرفا ولا عدلا. And they say sarf refers to tawbah, right? Or the nafila, right? And the adl is the fidya or the fard. Okay. So, but Ibn Abdin says that sarf, the root meaning that is relevant to exchange, to sarf, in the legal discussion on sarf, the root meaning that is relevant, what is it, Sadati? He says, وَقَدْ عُلِمَ أَنَّهُ يُطْلَقُ لُغَةً عَلَى بَيْعِ الثَّمَنِ بِالثَّمَنِ. يُطْلَقُ لُغَةً عَلى بَيْعِ الثَّمَنِ بِالثَّمَنِ. And the ziyada there would be because it is typically sought. Right? The ziyada there is because it is typically sought. So it's also always important to try to understand, why are they defining it in this way? A very important dictionary of the Arabic language, as used by the fuqaha, is a work by Abu Hafs al-Nasafi called Tilbatu al-Talabah, by Abu Hafs al-Nasafi. He's the author of the Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, but he was actually a greater faqih than he was a theologian. He actually was his aqidah text became so widespread because it was so brief. He took from giants in aqidah. Anyways, Um, so Abu Hafs al-Nasafi quotes Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad, the author of the first great Arabic dictionary, Al-Ain, that sarf is fadlu dirhami ala dirham. Right? Fadlu dirham ala dirham. Because when you exchange, someone's looking for advantage. Right? And from that, you have the money exchangers called the Sarf, for example. Right? And so he says, وَسُمِّيَ عَقْدُ الصَّرْفِ بِهِ لِأَنَّ الْغَالِبَ فِيهِ طَلَبُ الْفَضْلِ. سُمِّيَ عَقْدُ الصَّرْفِ بِهِ. Because sarf is based on exchange, and exchange is based on زيادة. So he says, سُمِّيَ عَقْدُ الصَّرْفِ بِهِ لِأَنَّ الْغَالِبَ فِيهِ طَلَبُ الْفَضْلِ. Number one. Or لأنه من الصرف الذي هو النقل, transfer, because you're transferring one currency for the other.
I'm sorry, Assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused. Firstly, regarding the sarf, and secondly, the term ziyada. As per my knowledge, ziyada means is an issue of profitability, an issue of profit. It's in the sense that it's like a margin, profit margin, ziyada. Are you getting me? But my concern when you mention about dirham to dirham, I can understand it is of par value. If you're selling, for example, if you're selling an item,
we're talking,
for example,
Sayyidi, so we're discussing where does the term sarf come from in the Arabic language, right? The Arabic language precedes the ahkam al-shar'iyya, right? So the Arabs use the word sarf with the meaning of ziyada, right? Ziyada, of increase. Because people would exchange, right? Would exchange gold for gold, silver for silver, etc. And very often when the exchange would happen would be because someone had worn out coins, etc. They would exchange them for better coins, for example. So sarf in the Arabic language has the meaning of exchange and increase. That's the root meaning of sarf in the Arabic language. However, in the Shara, it has a more specific meaning, which is what we will see. That's coming next. Right? That's coming next. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So first we're looking at the lexical, the lughawi meaning, right? And then we look at the shar'i meaning, which is بيع ثمن بثمن. It's the sale of one thaman, of one intrinsic currency for another. And if it's the same currency, if it's gold for gold or silver for silver, it has to be at par, the rulings that are coming up. So, now, the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ emphasize that this exchange has to be like in the hadith, one of the key hadiths of riba, and this is the hadith of Sayyidina Ubadah ibn al-Samit. قال رسول الله صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر والشعير بالشعير والتمر بالتمر والملح بالملح مثلا بمثل سواء بسواء يدا بيد. Right? So they have to be مثلا بمثل. They have to be at par, مثلا بمثل سواء بسواء, and completely the same. فإذا اختلفت هذه الأصناف فبيعوا كيف شئتم. But if it's outside of these categories, i.e. you're not doing a direct exchange of one category for itself, then sell as you wish. إذا كان يدا بيد. So, gold, each of these categories, if they're exchanged for themselves, it has to be hand to hand. If the classes differ, right, then sell as you wish, as long as it's made hand by hand, right? So if you're exchanging gold for silver, there has to be exchange within the majlis. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim. And there's other hadiths related to this. Amongst them is the hadith of Sayyidina Sayyidina Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakra an Abihi, from Abu Bakra radiallahu ta'ala anhu, right? That the Prophet that nahan Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam an al-fiddati bil-fidda wa-dirhami bil-dirham illa sawa'an bi-sawa'. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam forbade exchange of silver for silver or gold for gold except at par. وأمرنا أن نبتاع الذهب بالفضة كيف شئنا والفضة بالذهب كيف شئنا, right? But silver could be exchanged for gold however we wanted, meaning it can be at variance. So those are a couple of the hadiths. Now let's see the section here itself. He says Kitab al-Sarf. Right? So the lughawi meaning of sarf we took is an-naqlu wa ziyada. It's transfer and increase. But the lughawi meaning has the exchange of one currency for another. Okay. So he says, rahimahullahu ta'ala, huwa bay'u thamanin bi thaman. It's the exchange of one thaman for another. تجانسا أو لا, whether they're the same category, i.e. gold for gold or silver for silver, or not. Right. And here you can look usefully at Majalla item 121. Right. وشرط فيه التقابض قبل التفرق. Right. And the condition in Sarf transactions is that the exchange has to be completed before the two people part. Before the two people part from the majlis. So in a contract, the offer and acceptance has to take place before the defined majlis finishes. And we took the discussion of the majlis, right? Anything. So that's a delicate majlis. Anything that could indicate turning away from the contract ends the majlis. Busying yourself with another action ends the majlis. And we've taken that. You can review it from that section. Here, it's the exchange has to actually take place. Taqabud, possession has to be taken before they physically part. Tafaruq bil abdan. Okay. قبل التفرق أي بالأبدان. Right? So this is till the end of the physical majlis. Okay. That's the key condition in all sarf transactions. Okay. Then he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, that وصح بيع الجنس بغيره مجازفة وبفضل. One can exchange one category of thaman for another category of thaman without measure. Mujazafatan, this is a term we've taken earlier. Mujazafa is exchange without measuring it. So you say, I'll sell you this, I'll exchange this gold for that silver without weighing it. Right? This is permissible. The only time the fuqaha would give fatwa on that would be if people start making this as a way of making a loophole for riba, but I wouldn't explain how that could be done. There are ways. Right? So if you're exchanging one jins for the other, it can be done without measure or with disparity. Because the different ajnas, the different categories of thaman, gold, silver, have different values. لا بيعه بجنسه إلا متساويا. But one cannot exchange the same category except at par. وإن اختلفا جودة وصياغة. Even if they have different quality or fashioning. Because gold and silver are ribawi in all their types. There's athman. So you have one gold bracelet that's high value, that's high quality, and the other is worn out. It has to be exchanged at par. And at par would be not in its modern price, but at par would be considered by its weight value, right? The weight of the gold in it. And we've taken some of that earlier, so do refresh yourself. Okay. فإن بيع مجازفة ثم علم التساوي قبل التفرق جاز. If one exchanged the gold, the same category, مجازفة, without weighing, but then before parting, we came to know that they were at par, this becomes valid. So the potential sin is lifted. This is if they're the same category. Okay. Now you have to take possession of the two items of exchange, correct? So there is a consequence to this, which he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, that ولا يجوز التصرف في بدل الصرف قبل قبضه. One cannot transact in the exchange of the sarf transaction before taking possession of it, because the taqabud is a condition. Right? So you can't sell it to another, you cannot gift it to another before first taking possession of it. And so taking possession is a condition, so this is an implication. So what's the consequence of that? فَلَوْ, this fa is of consequence. And that qabd is a condition. فَلَوْ بَاعَ ذَهَبًا بِفِضَّةٍ وَاشْتَرَى بِهَا ثَوْبًا قَبْلَ قَبْضِهَا. Right? So if one exchanged gold for silver, and one purchased by it, i.e. with the silver, a thobe, some cloth, i.e. before taking possession of it, before taking possession of that silver. قبضها, the female here is the fidda. What happens? What happens here? فسد بيع الثوب. The sale of the thobe becomes corrupt. Why does it become corrupt, Sadati? So you had gold. You made a sarf transaction for the silver. Once a sale takes place, who owns the silver now? You do, right? So let's say Kareem exchanged silver, X amount of silver for Y amount of gold, X amount of gold for Y amount of silver. Who does the silver belong to now? Kareem. But he owns that silver now. Can he use that silver to buy some cloth before taking possession of it?
Not until he takes possession.
Not before he takes possession. So that second transaction would be fasid. The second transaction would be fasid because the condition specified by the Prophet ﷺ of yadan biyad, of taking possession of it, is not allowed. And also because this can be a loophole for riba, right? And shubhas in riba and potential and clear potential loopholes are closed. Okay. So this is the simple example. And you would do well to diagram these yourself to understand them clearly, right? This is an intermediate level course, so we leave some of that diagramming to you. وَلَوْ اشْتَرَى أَمَةً تُسَاوِي أَلْفًا مَا طَوْقٍ قِيمَتُهُ أَلْفٍ بألفين ونقد ألفا فهو ثمن الطوق. Right? So someone purchased the Emma who's worth 1,000 with a طوق, with a necklace worth 1,000 for 2,000. But one only paid 1,000, then it's considered to be the price of the طوق, of the necklace. Why? It's called تحريا للجواز or تحريا للصحة. Right? We interpret things in a way that validates them. تحريا للجواز. It's come from Imam al-Karhi that الأصل حمل أفعال المكلفين على وجه الصحة والسداد. The basis is that one interpret the actions of the morally responsible in a way that makes them sound and valid and sound. Okay. Right. So this is one of the principles, right? Of course, we interpret them in a way that is valid, where that is reasonably possible, right? It does not require takalluf. It doesn't require takalluf or anything unusual. Okay. Right? And he said, وَلَوْ اشْتَرَاهَا بِأَلْفَيْنِ أَلْفٌ نَقْدُ وَأَلْفٌ نَسِيئَةٌ فَالنَّقْدُ ثَمَنٌ. Right? And if one brought it for 1,000 upfront and 1,000 deferred, right? The upfront is considered to be for the necklace. Right? Again, تحريا للصحة. ولو اشترى سيفا. And here it gets tricky, because what were the currencies at the time? The currencies were gold and silver. But people love gold and silver, so they would also use it for adornment. So what's the problem with buying something with gold and silver? Like with the currency being gold and silver, if it has gold and silver adornment in it, what do you have to make sure you fulfill upfront? What do you have to make sure you fulfill upfront, Sadati?
Hubs. Hubs.
Yeah. So the material value of the gold or silver in the item that you're buying, you have to pay that upfront. Why? Because if you're exchanging gold for gold, what has to be? So let's say you're buying a sword. Swords aren't made from gold, right? But let's say it's adorned with gold. Then you buy a sword worth 120 dinar. But it has 20 dinars worth of gold. Can you pay the 120 dinars deferred?
No.
No, right? So if you're buying an item that has gold adornment, the value of that gold adornment, if you're buying with gold and silver, has to be paid upfront. right? Because that amount, exchange of gold for gold or gold, even if you buy it with silver, the value of that value has to be exchanged upfront. So that's the concept, right? That there be taqabud. So if we understand that, we can understand these following issues. When ishtara sayfan, hilyatuhu khamsun. If one buys a sword whose hilya, whose adornment is worth 50, yani 50. بمئة ونقد 50. One bought it for 100, one bought the sword for 100, and one paid 50. فهي حصة الحلية. Then that 50 is considered to be for the hilya, the adornment. وإن لم يبين. Even if one did not make that explicit. Again, same principle. تحريا للجواز حيث أمكن. Striving to validate transactions as much as possible. Imam al-Karhi said, الأصل حمل أفعال المكلفين على وجه صحة والسداد حيث أمكن. The basis is that we interpret the actions of the morally responsible in a way that is valid and sound when reasonably possible. And some of the, this is paraphrasing from what some of the ulama mentioned from Imam al-Karhi, and they say حيث أمكن بلا تكلف, as long as it's possible without takalluf, right? Without having to make far-fetched interpretation, right? Without having to make far-fetched interpretation. Tawakkalna ala Allah. And that, of course, that principle applies to us in general in life as well, right? If someone does something, we interpret it in a sound way. وَإِن لَمْ يُبَيِّن, even if one did not say what it's for. Or قَالَ هِيَ مِنْ ثَمَنِهِمَا. Or even if he said it's from their price, right? It's from their price, the price of the sword and the adornment. So when you mention two things, one could be intended. And that's a lughawi thing. And the commentators mention that there's many examples of that in the Quran as well. You can read that in the commentaries. Like يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان. Now here also sometimes things will be mentioned in texts that we don't actually know what in the world are they referring to. And that يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان. What is it referring to? So the fuqaha or the ulama write on the assumption that you have understanding. And if you don't know, what are you supposed to do? Just move on? No, you're supposed to go and look, right? You're supposed to go and look and find out. So this is also very important. That don't be content to just read something. Okay, but what does it mean? If you don't know what it means, you look it up. So I'm not going to look this up for you. You can post it on the forum, inshallah. This example that comes up over here in the commentaries, that two things can be mentioned. Right? But one is meant, right? And sometimes only one said, you and your cat are welcome. Right? But sometimes it's only you who are really welcome. Your cat is only mentioned secondarily. Right? So those are matters of usage. Right? Because if the person said, okay, I'm not coming, but I'll leave my cat with you. Nobody would say, yeah, sure, I'll take care of your cat unless they know the person well. Okay. Tamaman. So then, so we validate to the extent that's possible. وإن تفرقا بلا قبض صح في السيف دونها. Right? So he says, and if they part, right, without taking possession, صح أي البيع, the transaction is valid in the sword itself. دونها, دون الحلية, right? Not in the حلية. Not in the adornment. إن تخلص بلا ضرر. If it can be separated without harm. Right? Because some adornment is separable. So you say, okay, the transaction was valid in the sword itself. Sword's made of metal, of base metal. But the adornment, it was not valid. So what we'd have to do, we'd have to say, okay, that's cancelled. We resell it with that if it's separable. But if it's not separable, right, if the adornment is not separable, then he says, وَإِلَّا بَطَلَ فِيهِمَا. Otherwise, it's invalidated in both of them. Right? It's invalidated. Right? It's not valid. Why? Because the condition of gold being, like athman being exchanged for one another, qabd has to take place before they part. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ affirmed it, and so we close all the gateways, all the reasonable gateways to riba. Okay. So this applies to the athman. Here you can see Majalla item 47. It highlights a related principle, and you can read up on it. وإن باع إناء فضة وقبض بعض ثمنه وافترقا صح فيما قبض فقط. And if one sold a silver vessel and took possession of a part of the price, it's valid for the amount taken. فقط. والإناء مشترك بينهما. So here, the silver vessel, it's all silver. So what happens? It becomes shared between the two. Now, are they stuck with it together? No. Right? I said, okay, if you want to take it, pay the rest. Right? Pay the rest. But they would have engaged in a prohibited transaction. So the sarf transactions are limiting. Right? Are limiting in this regards. وإن استحق بعضه, right? وإن استحق بعضه أخذ المشتري ما بقي بحصته أو رده. Right? If some of the vessel what's istihqaq? That it's due to a third party. Then the buyer can accept what's remaining or return it, right? Or return it because it turns out to belong to a third party. Okay. ولو استحق بعض قطعة نقرة اشتراها أخذ الباقي بحصته بلا خيار. Right? And if a piece of raw silver becomes due to another party, then one can take the rest for its share of the price without choice, right? Because raw silver is divisible. So this amount belonged to that party, the rest is the buyer's. So that resolves the issue. These are all related to the shart of qabd. Okay. Then he gives a clarification that وصح بيع درهمين ودينار بدينارين ودرهم. Right? It is permitted to sell 2 dirhams and 1 dinar for 2 dinars and 1 dirham. Right? Why? Because one can consider the dinar for the dirham and the dirham for the dinar, so it's not at variance. وبيع كر بر ب وكري شعير بكري بر وكري شعير, right? So one can sell one kur, one measure of wheat, and one of barley for two of each, exchanging one for the other. وبيع 11 درهما ب10 دراهم ودينار. Likewise selling 11 dirhams for 10 dirhams and 1 dinar. The only time this would be makruh would be if it's somehow being used as a disguise for riba. As a disguise for riba. That you're financing a house, etc., but you engage in this kind of transaction to cover up for riba. So then it would not be allowed. So when the jins is different, you can sell as you wish, and you can interpret, one category being for the other, like in each of these examples. Right? Okay. And then he says, وَبَيْعُ دِرْهَمٍ صَحِيحٍ وَدِرْهَمٍ غَلَّ بِدِرْهَمَيْن صَحِيحَيْن وَدِرْهَمٍ غَلَّ. So it is valid to exchange one sound dirham for two unauthorized dirhams. So the ghalla, what is it? Did anyone look it up? Right? So when it came to gold and silver, what would happen? There would be the traders there would often be ghish. Right? There would be some admixing. So the dirham is sahih, the sound dirham, and it has various terms that are used for it. The sound dirham is the one that is accepted by the tujjar, that is accepted in the marketplace, and accepted by the treasury, the Bayt al-Mal. Whereas the ghalla is a dirham that the traders are fine with, right? You want to buy my things? Okay, it's good enough. Sure, go ahead. But if it goes to the treasury, would they accept it? The Bayt al-Mal would not accept it. It's not the properly sanctioned dirham. Could be some admixture into it because people used to shave off the sides, melt in other coins, etc. Human beings do what human beings do. You want to understand the human being? When you read the Quran, write down everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the human being. تُحِبُّونَ الْمَالَ حُبًّا جَمًّا. You love wealth with exceeding love. Right? جُبِلَتِ الْأَنفُسِ. Human selves are naturally inclined towards shuh, to be stingy, possessive, and all the other meanings. تُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَ. You love the immediate. So you're going to do all kinds of things for it, right? And etc. So one has to be aware of that. How come people do this? When where deception is possible, what do we expect people to do? To deceive. Where lying is possible, people are going to lie. That is, now we have a husn al-dhan about individuals, but we approach human actions with caution. We don't think that Masir cheated. No, but we approach with caution, so we monitor his exam, for example, right? With all love and respect to Masir Bhai. Okay. So this is valid to transact in. Right? As long as it's done at par. As long as it's done at par. Also because إذا اتحد الجنس, right? إذا اتحد الجنس فلا عبرة بالجودة. When we have the same category, there is no consideration for quality, if you remember. Can you exchange 1 kilo of premium dates for 2 kilos of low quality dates?
Yes.
No. Because إذا اتحد الجنس, when there's the same category of item, You cannot exchange at par. Can you exchange 1 kilo of basmati rice for 2 kilos of low quality rice? No. And that goes to the ahkam of riba. We're not going to review those. You can review that. The thing to do, of course, as mentioned by Ibrahim earlier, was when there is an exchange like this, what do? We break it into 2 transactions. That's the way of safety. Set a price for the valuable item and set a price for the less valuable item and break it into 2 transactions. And that's come in hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. That's how we avoid this matter. And this avoids the issue of riba. Okay. And then he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَبَيْعُ دِينَارٍ بِعَشْرَةٍ هِيَ عَلَيْهِ. And one can exchange 10 dinars for 10 owed. أو بعشرة مطلقة إن دفع الدينار. One can exchange 10 dinar, right, for 10 that he owes, as long as you make the payment of in the majlis, right? And this is called muqassa, right? That one debt is cleared by another. So if you, right? So you can exchange. So the example here, you can exchange 10 dinars for 10 that you are owed, or that you owe. وَيَتَقَاصَّانِ الْعَشَرَ بِالْعَشْرَ. And when the 10 owed covers the 10 that needs to be given. And so one thing cancels out the other. Okay. وَمَا غَالِبُهُ الْفِضَّةُ أو الذهب فِضَّةٌ وَذَهَبٌ حُكْمًا. That which is majority gold is, or majority silver is treated like pure gold or pure silver in value. And that deals with the question that was asked by Uncle Masir. Thank you, Uncle. Assalamu alaikum. That, what about exchanging 18 carat versus 22 carat gold, etc.? Yes, if you want to exchange them, the safer position is we don't calculate what percentage gold is for what percentage gold, etc. Gold traders have different ways of calculating them. The way of safety is break it into 2 transactions, right? Because of the many hadiths that when you exchange one category of item for the same, particularly the athman, gold and silver, then quality is not of consideration there. And quality includes the degree of purity of the gold, which is what the carats measure. تماما. فلا يجوز بيع الخالص به ولا بيع بعضه ببعض إلا متساويا وزنا. So it is not permitted to exchange the pure of it, right, of the gold or of the silver, in exchange for that which is had a mixture, except at par, right? So one can only exchange gold or silver for that which is majority gold or silver at par, at equal weight. ولا استقراضه إلا وزنا. And one cannot borrow it except by weight, right? The weight value has to be the same, right? Because sometimes you have coins, gold coins, for example, in the old days, they would be of different weight, different sizes. So let's say they start using, instead of talking about the weight of, 10 dirham for 10, there's different types of dirham. What counts is the weight value, not the units. And it would get messy. Right? It would get messy. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. وما غلب عليه الغش منهما فهو في حكم العروض. And that which is majority مغشوش, alloyed metal with only the less than 50% is gold or silver, it is like a trade good, right? فيبيعه بالخالص على على وجوه حلية السيف, right? So then one can sell for pure gold with the same rulings as the scenario of the gold adorned sword, that the estimated extent of the gold in it, that much has to be paid up front. The rest could be deferred. So it gets quite messy. ويصح بيعه بجنسه متفاضلا بشرط التقابض في المجلس. And one can sell for the same unit with disparity if possession is taken in the gathering. This is the alloyed metal. والتبايع والاستقراض بما يروج منه وزنا أو عددا أو بهما. So alloyed metals is valid to exchange and borrow them by weight or number or both if they are in circulations. This applies to the ghalib al-ghish, and the same rulings as we'll see apply to fulus. Right? ولا يتعين بالتعيين لكونه ثمنا. Right? And it's not specified by specification. ولو اشترى به فكسد بطل البيع. And if one buys by base metals and it goes out of circulation, the transaction is invalidated. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, وقال لا يبطل. But the Sahibain said it's not invalid. وتجب قيمته يوم البيع عند أبي يوسف. And the value at the day of the original sale is due according to Abu Yusuf. وآخر ما تعومل به عند محمد. And according to Muhammad, the last time that people did engage in transacting with it. وما لا يروج منه يتعين بالتعيين. And that which is not in circulation, then it is purely like a trade good. It's becomes specified by specification. So this is ghalib al-ghish, but also alloyed metals. That would be the fulus, right? That would be the fulus. That because gold and silver have intrinsic value. The value of fulus is fulus are base metal currency. What is their value? Their value is is conventional. So if people stop using it, what happens? In the old days, they would stop using it either because so much of it went into the market, all the traders said, we will not accept it anymore. And traders were often, they in many of the lands, they had guilds, right? They had guilds. So they agreed. They got together and they said, all these people are coming from Balkh and they're bringing all these fulus that, we can't distinguish. Should we use them or not? So the marketplace could reject them, right? To safeguard their rights. There's a lot of cheating going on. So the marketplace, how would they agree? Because they had various guilds. The heads of each guild came together in the marketplace and said, we won't deal with these fulus from such and such area because there's a lot of ghish involved or whatever. Or the ruler, because the ruler was supposed to appoint a muhtasib, someone who establishes public accounting. Right? And there's different types of ihtisab. Right? There's a moral ihtisab, which is to make sure that people aren't selling alcohol or other haram things. And there's also ihtisab over things like weights and measures that people would use to weigh things, but also ihtisab, so that it's quality control in the market, and also be ihtisab over gold and silver. So they discover a lot of cheating going on with these fulus, and they could be warnings, etc. Could say, okay, it can no longer be transacted in. Now, what about the transactions that were made with those base metals? At the time, Abu Hanifa said, what's the value of those fulus, the base metal currency? It's by convention, because they're not considered to have intrinsic value. The value of gold is its intrinsic value. This is X number of grams of gold. That is its value. That's why I say, خُلِقَتْ لِلثَّمَنِيَّة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created gold and silver with an intrinsic value. That's the hikmah of Allah's creating it. Whereas the fulus, the base currency, their value is bil istilah. So what happens? Right, what happens? Right? According to the Sahibain, right? Right? It's not invalidated. And this is what the fatwa position is on the position of the Sahibain. That if they stopped transacting in the base metal currencies, the fulus, what would happen? The transaction is not invalidated, but then Imam Abu Yusuf said that we would consider the value of the equivalent value of the base, the base currency on the day of the transaction. That is easier to determine. Or the last that it had value of it in the marketplace. So then there's ikhtilaf, whose opinion. So there's broad agreement that the fatwa here is on the position of the Sahibain in general. That if these these base metals were no longer they're no longer accepted in circulation, then we go by the value. How do we consider the value? What would we understand from the text itself? Whose opinion is taken? Abu Yusuf or Muhammad? Abu Yusuf, because he mentions it first, right? So Maulana, Imam al-Haskafi writes for intelligent people, right? So Imam al-Haskafi says, وَلَا تَغْفَلْ عَنْ قَاعِدَةِ الْمُصَنِّفِ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. And don't forget the principle of the author. What's the principle of the author here? That he applies, yeah, right? Right. تماما. So this has applications in our times when it comes to currencies, when they stop being in circulation. Right? And many of the ulama give fatwa as well, where currencies are completely devalued. When currencies are completely devalued, right? Diyanatan, so let's say there's a long-term loan, right? There's a big, and this is not as, can someone check how much is $1 right now in Syrian lira? Someone just do an online check for that, please. When I left Syria in 2001, I recall the market rate was about $1 was 50 Syrian lira, the year 2001. No, but that's with the new currency, Okay, that's with the new currency. Right? The new currency. You have to add a few zeros to it. $1 was 11,000 Syrian lira. They recently chopped off 2 zeros from the currency, right? But before that announcement, and they're slowly transitioning. But let's say you borrowed, let's say Uncle Masir, when he was not yet uncle, in the year 2000, he went to Damascus and he married Masira. He found this, he heard that one of the shuyukh's daughters, her name is Masira. So he said, I want to marry her. So he didn't have any money though. So he borrowed 100,000. He borrowed, you're not Uncle Masir. We're talking about Uncle Masir, not Masir Ali. So he borrowed 10,000 or 100,000 Syrian lira, payable in 25 years. So, a righteous man said, look, Masir beta, you can pay me back in 25 years. So the 100,000 Turkish Syrian lira afwan at $50 per 50 lira to the dollar, that was how many dollars? $2,000. Now, 25 years later, 100,000 Turkish lira at an exchange rate of 11,000 Turkish lira, Syrian lira to the dollar, how much would it have been? Believe it or not, $9, right? $9. Is that in any way fair? Is that in any way fair? Of course, for Uncle Masir, it's very fair, right? He got his mahr ended up, the debt for his mahr ended up being how much? $9. Uncle Masir would have married 4 wives on debt if that's what it takes. But alas, so when a currency, loses significant value, right? So they said that's akin to kasad, akin to it stopped being dealt with, and where it utterly loses its value, then diyanatan, how it's resolved in court is a separate thing, but diyanatan, you should repay it at its value at the time of the transaction in another currency. We can apply other examples. If you look at the chart for the Turkish lira, 10 years ago, 10 or slightly more than 10 years ago, $1 was 3.5 Turkish lira. How much is $1 in Turkish lira now? $1, how many Turkish lira is it now? Yeah, over 40. So you borrowed 100. You borrowed, let's say, 350,000 Turkish lira. Yeah, over now 43. Subhanallah. Right? You borrowed 430,000 Turkish lira from somebody, which would have been over 100,000 US, repayable in 10 years. Now, how much is it worth? So it was worth 100,000. That debt was worth 100,000 US. Now it would be worth 10,000 US, right? Tenfold. Is that a significant loss? It's huge. So in those cases, diyanatan, one should repay at at the value of a standard currency, which we would like it or not right now, would be, like the US dollar or the euro or any other global currency. That would be, so when there's significant loss in the value of the currency, and it's not the regular fakir, but like, it completely bottoming out, then this principle would apply. Okay. And then it says, ومتساوي الغش كمغلوبه في التبايع والاستقراض. And that which, in exchange and in loans, something that is 50% gold and 50% non-gold, or 50% silver and 50% non-silver, would be considered like majority alloyed. وكذا في الصرف. The same thing applies in sarf. وقيل كغالبه. And the other position is that it's like the majority of it being being gold. That's more cautious, but the other one is more practically expansive. And then the final part, he tells us the rulings of fulus. Okay, the rulings of fulus. Now there's a beautiful quote at the end of the section in Imam al-Haskafi's commentary. He says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْفُلُوسَ لَيْسَتْ بِثَمَنٍ فِي الْأَصْلِ. So the base currencies are not originally, they're not intrinsically a currency. إنما ضربت لتقوم مقام الكسور من الفضة. They were only minted in order to serve the purpose of small pieces of silver. لحاجة الناس, because people needed it. It's hard to break coins into parts. لحاجة الناس إلى ذلك في شراء المحقرات, because people needed, base currency, like loose change, basically like loose change, to buy insignificant things. لأن كسر الدرهم لو صح مكروه, because breaking, silver coins into pieces is disliked. It's a ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And he quotes this from the Shurunbulaliyah. What is the Shurunbulaliyah, Sadati? The Shurunbulaliyah is the Hashiyah of Imam al-Shurunbulali on the Durar of Mullah Khusro. The Durar of Mullah Khusro, which Imam Ibn Abdin says that هو كتاب مبني على غاية التحقيق. It's a brilliant work and one of the primary inspirations for much of what came after in Hanafi fiqh. Okay, so let's look at this issue of fulus. He says, ويجوز بيع الفلوس النافقة وإن لم يتعين. One can exchange ويجوز البيع بالفلوس النافقة وإن لم يتعين. It is valid to engage in sales with fulus that are in circulation, even if they are not specified, i.e. by saying these fulus, for example. فإن كسدت فالخلاف كما في كساد المغشوش. And if they cease to be transacted with, then the same difference applies as applies to majority alloyed metal, like things that are not actually majority gold, right? And we looked at that discussion. I sort of amalgamated it there for simplicity. And then ولو استقرضها أي الفلوس. If one borrowed فلوس فكسدت, they lose circulation, يرد مثلها. One returns the same amount by value. Right? وعند أبي يوسف قيمتها يوم القرض. According to Abu Yusuf, what is due the day of the debt? وعند محمد يوم الكساد. And according to Muhammad, the day it lost its circulation value. And this is if it loses total value. ولا يجوز البيع بغير النافقة ما لم يتعين. You cannot make sales with fulus that are not in circulation unless you specify with these fulus, right? Because fulus, though, because they are still a currency, so they don't need specification, right? Whereas you can't say can you say I will buy your headphones for 3 sibhas? Can you? No, you have to specify, right? For 3 of these sibhas, for example, right? And if you're in present, you can examine it, or by sufficiently describing it. Right? So this is fulus that are no longer in circulation. ما لم يتعين, unless you have specified them. تماما. ومن اشترى بنصف درهم فلوس أو دانق فلوس أو قراط فلوس جاز البيع, right? So it is valid to engage in these transactions where one bought with half a dirham a certain extent of fulus, right? It is valid. وعليه ما يباع بنصف درهم, right? But you didn't specify how many fulus. عليه ما يباع بنصف درهم. And what would be owed would be how many fulus are acquired in the market for half a dirham أو دانق أو قيراط منها, right? Why? Because in the market, right, whereas the price of commodities, items of sale fluctuate, but the relationship between gold and silver and fulus tends to be clearly known in the marketplace. So this would not customarily lead to dispute. Right? ولو دفع إلى صيرفي درهما وقال أعطني بنصفه فلوسا وبنصفه نصفا إلا حبة فسد البيع في الكل. If one asked to give fulus for half a dirham and half minus a weight of the other half, it's corrupt in all, right? Because this is a ذريعة of riba. وعندهما صح في الفلوس, and according to them, it's valid in the fulus. ولو كرر أعطني صح في الفلوس اتفاقا. ولو قال أعطني به نصف درهم فلوس ونصفا إلا حبة صح في الكل والنصف إلا حبة بمثله والفلوس بالباقي. Right? This is to close the gateway to riba. The last thing that we'll touch upon is how do we treat modern currencies, right? And this sadati is dealt with as follows. That according to most of the Arab scholars and the and most of the major fiqh assemblies, the majami' al-fiqhiyya, the fiqh councils, modern currencies, they call them thaman. They're athman. They are a new category of intrinsic currency. So they're athman. So if they're athman, what applies to them? And they take the place of gold and silver. So the athman, according to this position, are gold, silver, and modern currencies. So therefore, two rulings apply to them. Riba applies to them, and the rulings of sarf apply to them. So exchange of currencies, including, like a modern currency for gold. Not only do the rulings of riba apply, but what also applies? The rulings of sarf. So if you buy gold for dollar, if you pay by dollars, what is the complicating factor of this position? The rulings of sarf apply.
They have to be paid before the splitting
The payment has to be made in the majlis. So can you buy it in installments?
No.
No, right? So that adds a lot of complicating factors. Can you buy it online? Because you bought it, but they'll deliver it in a week. Right? So it causes a whole bunch of complicating problems. But, the ahkam al-shar'iyya, there's an aspect of ta'abbud. If this is what Allah seeks from us, this is what Allah seeks from us, right? وَقَالُوا سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. Right? Right? So this has, it would apply to jewelry, everything. It has to be paid up front. The exchange has to be in the majlis. The rule, riba applies and the rules of sarf apply. And so this would apply, therefore, to, and this is what most contemporary scholars, the majami' al-fiqhiyya, etc. say, and that has many complicating aspects. The discussion on this from fiqh al-buyu' and the shorter discussion from the abridgment of fiqh al-buyu', Sidi Abdul Latif, you can request Uncle Umar to share it with you. We'll share the two PDFs here. But the second position, which is held by most of the contemporary Hanafi scholars from the subcontinent, is that the modern currencies are thaman istilahan, right? They are like fulus. The hukum is they're fulus ra'ija, right? They're like fulus ra'ija. And according to the position of Imam Muhammad, does riba apply to fulus? Does riba apply to fulus? According to Imam Muhammad. So if you recall in the matan, the position of Imam Abu Hanifa is يجوز بيع فلس بفلسين وتفاحة بتفاحتين, etc., etc., right? It's in the mutun of the Hanafi madhab. That's the position of Imam Abu Hanifa, Siraj al-Ummah, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi. However, what is the position of Imam Muhammad when it comes to fulus? Can you sell fulus at variance? Sidi Abdul Latif? Riba applies to fulus. If you recall from the lesson, Sadati, riba applies to fulus. Why? We mentioned because people started transacting more with fulus for various reasons. So therefore, it became you had to close the door for riba. So they took the position from Muhammad, who applied it in his times. That was not the fatwa position, but with the increase in circulation of fulus, etc., they took that position. Now fulus, how do they have value? Is it the weight value of the metal of the fulus? Right? The gold and silver have an intrinsic value, which is the weight value of the gold, the weight value of the silver. But if we say, okay, these are copper coins minted, what is the value of the copper coin? Is it the weight of the copper?
Not from the.
No, it's a assigned value, right? It's istilahan. They assign a value that, either the market sets its value or the authorities say, okay, these we have issued Masiri fulus. And the Masiri fulus are 1 dirham is 100 Masiri fulus. Are 100 Masiris. So it's by convention. That's why loss of value and all these things, because convention can change. Modern currencies, by this analysis, are like the fulus. Their value is conventional. Riba applies to them because the fatwa, since the time of Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam in the Hanafi school, has necessarily been on the position of Muhammad al-Hasan, that riba applies in fulus. Riba applies in fulus, and modern currency resembles the base metals. It has conventional value. The discussion of this can be seen, we'll share the readings from this in detail in Mufti Taqi Usmani's work, Fiqh al-Buyu', and in summary in the abridgment of Fiqh al-Buyu' done by Mufti Abu Lubaba. But basically, they are conventional currency. They are like fulus al-ra'ija, the fulus that are in circulation. They're thaman, istilahan. So riba applies, but do the rulings of sarf apply? No, they do not. Right? And this most contemporary Hanafi, subcontinental Hanafis. So, Pakistani sometimes get upset if you call it the Indian subcontinent. If you call it the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Bangladeshis get upset. And then also, does Burma fit into it, etc.? So that subcontinent. So according to this position, sarf does not apply to modern currencies. Riba applies, but sarf does not apply to modern currencies. So therefore, you could buy gold online and the exchange does not have to take place in the majlis. You could buy gold in installments, etc. And that is far more expansive. You want to be cautious, try to apply the first position. But the second position is what is argued by leading contemporary Hanafis, and they give fatwa on this, and they are ahl lil fatwa. And in terms of being rigorously applying to the Hanafi fiqh, this is closer to the Hanafi fiqh of the issue. You can see the discussion in Fiqh al-Buyu', pages 235 and 236, and elsewhere. Right? So Mufti Taqi Usmani's book, Mashru' Qanun al-Islami fi al-Buyu', this is item 131, right? That the Nuqud al-Waraqiyya, that modern currencies cannot be exchanged with disparity or deferral in single currency, but, right, but what you are allowed to do is different currencies can be exchanged at variance, right? 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 But one of the two items has to be taken possession of in the majlis, even if the other is deferred. So you can take the details from the slides. This is from the Mashru' Qanun al-Ahwal al-Shakhsiyya, Mashru' al-Qanun. So this is what we wanted to cover. So do read the section that we provide from the abridgment of Fiqh al-Buyu'. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Next we will look at guarantees, كفالة. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. Any questions before we close? Sadati? Alhamdulillah. So there's quite a lot of concepts today regarding Sarf, the conditions of Sarf, particularly the key one, because the Sarf, when it comes to gold and silver, the fiqh of riba applies, and there has to be taqabud fil majlis. Right? There has to be actual exchange within the majlis. But mere specification is not enough, right? You have to take possession of the item of exchange in the majlis. And things that are adorned with gold, adorned with silver, taqabud is required for the extent of the gold or extent of the silver if the sale is made in gold and silver. However, the more expansive position, that would not be required. So if Uncle Masir purchased a Damascus sword with silver adornment on it, he would not have to pay for the value of the silver in the majlis. But if he did so, he would be rewarded. Why? Because what's the ruling of al-khuruj min al-khilaf? Avoiding difference of opinion. What is its ruling? The ruling of avoiding difference of opinion is that it is recommended, right? It is mustahab. So there's merit in that. Okay? But in terms of fatwa, this is facilitative, right? And we looked at the issue of modern currency. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for ease, assistance, and facilitation. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wa akhiru da'wana an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.